Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Millicent Walker. On this episode of Law Weekly, there has been a push by governors and monarchs in some parts of the country for the federal government to regulate the social media following the NSAS protest. We begin with a report on the resurgence of social media regulation vis-a-vis the right to freedom of expression. My guest, the Deputy Director of Socio-Economic Rights and Accountability Project, SERAP, and lawyer, Oluwadari Kolawole, and also Professor Taiwo Shigbiton, a senior advocate of Nigeria. And later, you'll see more highlights of the Judicial Panel of Inquiry into cases of police brutality and human rights violations committed by operatives of the dissolved Special Anti-Robbery Squad across the country. Regulating the social media has come under the spotlight again, following thousands of NSAS protesters calling for an end to police brutality, which saw young people participate through the digital tools on their smartphones, especially social media platforms, to drive, organize and sustain the protests. For some, it's the best form of freedom of expression, one of the guaranteed rights in the Constitution. But for others, it's caused more harm, breeds more fake news, and should be regulated.
The meeting took note of the devastating effect of the uncontrolled social media in spreading fake news. Therefore, calls for major control mechanism and censorship of the social media's practice in Nigeria.
Yes, we would protect the free press, we will protect democracy, we will protect the rights of every Nigerians to express themselves. But at the same time, we must protect the rights of others.
Everything has been revolutionized by the social media, from education, entertainment, or sharing information. One thing is certain. Unlike the traditional media channels such as television, newspapers, radio, the social media requires only a smartphone and data to function from anywhere in the world. It's fast, it's handy, somewhat affordable. It can get to millions and the impact tremendous. Is that why we're seeing a rise in fake news? Our data analyst, Channels Television data analyst, talks about this.
We can't talk about fake news without talking about how it shaped and influenced the recent protests. While some of the information that came out, especially from influencers and bloggers, some of that information was real. A lot of that information also was classified as fake news. One of the reasons why we classified a lot of the information that went viral regarding the security situation in Lekki as fake news is because in the scope of being able to identify or differentiate between fake news and real news, you have to put the news in three segments. You have to look at what happened before, what happened during, and what happened after. Regarding the Lekki scenario, for instance, what we've seen is majority of the news that was shared by online bloggers and influencers were what happened during and what happened after. The part of the picture that has been really omitted is what happened before the alleged shooting. And that's one way to be able to see if the news is balanced or unbalanced.
Attempts by the Nigerian government to regulate social media dates back to December 2015. Prohibits frivolous petitions and other matters connected therewith. It was proposed by Senator Bala Ibn Ala. The proposal of the bill, which prescribes jail term and $10,000 fine for posts on social media, was withdrawn 6 months later in face of widespread public criticism. Since then, more bills have sprung up, like the Protection from Internet Falsehood and Manipulation Bill introduced in November 2019 and the National Commission for the Prohibition of Hate Speech Bill. Both bills seek to address the twin issues of disinformation and dangerous speech. But digital rights expert and executive director of Paradigm Initiative, Gbenga Sheson, thinks otherwise.
The reality is that this is not the way to solve the problem. Legislation is not the solution. And this has been shown across various countries in the world, except those countries that are not democracies, like China, where they can outright do anything they want and no one can ask questions. But if questions can be asked and you call yourself a democracy, then the things to do are different from this clamped down approach. one important thing to do is to empower citizens to be able to understand, what false information is, what dangerous speech is.
But what have other advanced democracies done as a sort of check for fake news?
One of the things they're doing is rather than use laws to regulate freedom of speech, is to improve how people think, improve critical thinking skills, especially at public schools. And so it allows the youths as they grow older to be able to, by themselves, discern what is fake news and what is real news. Allows you to be able to critically review and evaluate the information that comes to you. Is that model possible in Nigeria? Yes, it is. The government can invest a lot in critical thinking skills, especially in public schools.
Across the continent, in October, Lesotho issued regulations on how ordinary citizens use social media, seeking to force local social media users with more than 100 followers to register with the Lesotho Communications Authority (LCA) as internet broadcasters. Tanzania restricted access to the internet and social media applications during the recent elections. In June this year, we saw that Ethiopia imposed an internet shutdown which lasted for close to a month in response to unrest which followed the killing of a prominent Oromo singer and activist. While the Uganda government imposed a social media tax, Zimbabwe, Togo, Burundi, Chad, Mali and Guinea have restricted access to the internet or social media applications at some point this year. In 2019, there were 25 documented instances of partial or total internet shutdowns, compared with 20 in 2018 and 12 in 2017. This is according to an independent monitoring group called Access Now. According to Deputy Director Serap, the problem is not fake news, but government providing real and timely information to citizens, which removes the avenue for untrue information presented as news. He speaks to me in this interview.
I wouldn't understand what they mean by that. If that is trying to create a justification for what they called regulation, that would be wrong. Because as it is, we have enough laws in Nigeria to take care of what kind of fake news, as it were. And I think that has been in the public discourse for a while, and that has been overstated over and over again. We have the Cyber Crimes Act, which I'm aware that some of those governors have used against Nigerians. And we have the criminal code laws of each of the states and the penal code in the north, which criminalizes some of these things that they would relate to fake news. That really creates no basis to regulate social media. And when they say regulation, really, it calls for questioning as to what they mean by regulate. Does that mean regulating the end users, which are the people? Or does that mean regulating, as it were, those providers like Twitter, Facebook? What does that really mean? And within the context of what we've seen in Nigerian government antecedent, that would be dangerous because it's the breach of Nigerian laws, and in this case, Section 39 of the Constitution, and the various conventions that Nigerians have ratified, specifically talking about the African rights and Human People's African Charter, that's Article 9. And really, there is no need for it. That is just a simple way to put it.
Why do you think all of this is, their regulations and what it is they're coming up with means that they're trying to clamp down on free speech?
It's something that I would understand if it gave government concern, but not on the positive spin they try to create to it. Because what social media has done world over, and it's not uniquely a Nigerian problem, it has put power within the reach of the average citizen, which is not a bad thing, it's a good thing. If government and democracy that we practice in Nigeria is indeed for the people and on behalf of the people, then people must have a stake and we have an input. And freedom of expression is one of those core points, which is why I believe it was put in the Constitution to have people express themselves, engage the government and have feedback from the government as well. And that is why we've seen government trying to stifle that space, to kind of minimize the kind of feedback which some of them see as being too critical of what they do. That basically is the reason why these has been at the fore of government activities, and that you see the recurrence, that resurgence that you've mentioned of social media bill. And you will see that every time it had died through due to popular opinion. It wasn't really because the civil society organizations kicked against, because Nigerians, all Nigerians, rich, poor, old and young, have kicked against it. And it's very important that government understands that social media is not a bad thing. it is a good tool for governments to engage with the people. And like I used to say, we have a ministry. It's called the Ministry of Information. So government understands the necessity of information so much that we have a whole ministry dedicated to it. Why is the same government now afraid to hear back from the people? So if you have a ministry that dishes information out to the people, why shouldn't we have a platform that encourages people to express what they feel? Some of them may not be palatable, yes, but that is part of governance, that is part of democracy. And it's entrenched in rule of law that everyone is equal, including those in government. Social media should not be regulated. I'm yet to understand how fake news is a threat to democracy. I would rather say that lack of transparency and accountability, even in the management of information, is more of a threat to people. And so for what we do at Sarah, for instance, we can put it in perspective. This year alone, we've issued more than 200 Freedom of Information requests, which is issued pursuant to the Freedom of Information Act. These are just basic requests for information from Sarah. And I'm sure a lot of Nigerians do this. And I can tell you we've had less than 10 positive responses, if you have responses at all. That speaks to the government's attitude to transparency and accountability and how to manage information. And it still beats my mind, where we would have law officers of government at both at federal and state levels appear in court to defend the case where a citizen had only made a request for information. So with that background, you can understand that the problem is not fake news, but the absence of real, genuine truth in the public space for people to understand. We can look at COVID-19, for instance. How much has been spent? How much has been appropriated? Who has gotten what, when, and how? This information should naturally be in the public domain, and that removes the need for fake news. When the real news, you would agree that truth will be the cure for falsehood. So do we have enough feedback from government, real and correct information, timely information to people that would negate the fake news? And no, we don't have that. And that is why it appears that fake news is more of a problem. But I believe that transparency and accountability and information from the government is what is lacking, and that is what breeds good fake news. We can talk on and on, talk about budgetary expenditures. How open is our budgetary process? Nigeria is a member of the Open Government Partnership, the OGP. We signed on in 2016. How far have we fared? We have access to information is one of the key thematic areas that Nigeria works in. How have we fared in that area? How open is the budgetary process? How involved are the people? And so when we have fake news, for instance, online about how much was spent by government agencies and how much was remitted, the way government could have cured that is, can we have the budget in the open? Can we have the spending and expenditure of these budgetary provisions in the open? That will counter any sort of fake news. So again, it is not fake news that is the problem. It is a lack of transparency and accountability from the government.
Do you think government is struggling with information, especially making information readily available? And this is from perhaps what we inherited from the military administration.
I wouldn't know. I would find it very hard to speak for governments in that regard. And that is why you would see that even the Freedom of Information Act repealed the official Secrets Act and made some of those provisions null and void. So I wouldn't know. I'm yet to understand really from our various engagement with government officials why there is so much fear to be transparent. And we see governments on one hand paying lip service to being transparent, and the other hand, the actions of government show that tenacity to hold on to information and give it out in trickles, even with the best of fights. So you see some of the progresses we've made with the freedom of information request. We have to go through the courts, and the courts will have to give judgments. And more often than not, we still have to make sure we fight tooth and nail, even with advocacy, to make sure that those judgments are enforced. So I really don't understand. It may well be that it's one of the vestiges of military rule, but it's something we have to do away with. We've had democracy since 1999, and you would agree with me that we've had more than several years to cure ourselves of whatever the military has left behind. But it's something government should really pay attention to in the interest of democracy.
Nigeria is projected to be home to over 100 million mobile internet users by 2025. So we're going to have a lot more young people online, connecting, social media. So who teaches them responsibility while sending out messages or, in that space?
Okay, it's not about teaching, and you would agree with me that the best form of teaching is to lead and teach by example. But what we've seen is the political class and the public officers who behave largely responsibly and are not transparent and accountable with public funds and information. So how do they set a good precedent and a good example for the youths? So what we should have from the side of government is being responsible with power, particularly power over public funds and with information management, which leads us to transparency and accountability. That is a good, it gives them that moral authority to set a good precedent for the youths about how to use and manage information, the way they impart it and they receive it on social media. But we have not seen that, and that is what government should do.
Up next is my interview with Professor Taiwo Shikwiton, Senior Advocate of Nigeria. He also speaks about regulating social media, the revelations of the panel of inquiries across the country, and the admissibility of video evidence. He says it would be almost impossible to manipulate live streams.
Let me start by thanking the various state governments as well as the federal government for setting up the various tribunals to look into the various allegations of police brutality by victims of such brutalities and members of their family. It's a commendable one, a right step in the right direction. Each of the tribunal has its own terms of reference, and using Lagos as the pilot study, we'll discover that most of them are concerned or are supposed to expect to focus on the issues raised in their terms of reference. And the summary of the such issue is that they should investigate these allegations of police brutality. People who have experienced police brutality should come forward with their evidence. And where there are cases of proving brutality, it is expected that the tribunals will be very thorough and painstaking enough in identify the victims of the brutalities as well as those who oppress them. At the end of the day, each tribunal is expected to come up with its own recommendation. Where there are cases of deserving, cases which deserve compensation, one would expect that adequate compensation will be recommended for those who are victims of such brutality.
I want to come from the nitty-gritty of what we're seeing, the victims who are sharing their experience of police brutality. And we have a case where a man said that he went to the police station, which was the last time he saw his son. And this was as far back as 2011. How does he go about proving that he indeed saw his son, and then the police station is saying that's not true, his son was never there?
If a person is not seen for more than 7 years, there's a presumption of the obvious, namely that that person has died. Again, if somebody is, if the corpse of a victim, of a dead person, is not found, then again there's also a presumption that whoever was with him, was last seen with such person, is the person who killed that person. So if, for example, it is proved that this guy was arrested and taken to the police station, the fact that his corpse was not found after so many years of fruitless searches would obviously put the presumption in place that whoever the arresting officer or the detaining officer was must have killed that person. It's called circumstantial evidence. The person that has the last opportunity or last interaction with that victim will be presumed to have killed that victim unless he's able to produce that body.
There are also cases of video evidence springing up, live video evidence in some other cases. How do you rely on that, especially when bringing such a matter to a tribunal or to court?
Well, video evidence is a welcome development, and it gained statutory support under the new Evidence Act of 2011. So, like video evidence and computer evidence and electronic evidence, they are now admissible in court of law. If you have evidence that shows that is relevant to the terms of reference of a tribunal, then such tribunal can admit such evidence. In other words, relevancy. If it is relevant, it is ordinarily admissible in evidence. So, but then after admitting it, what do you do with it? You have to evaluate it. So for you to tender video evidence, you must also lay foundation to show that the person who actually did the recording must be the person to come and say he did the recording. Then he must also demonstrate that the device used by him or her, whether a phone or a camera, did not malfunction at the time it was being used. So if you lay that foundation and you show that the evidence is also relevant, then you're on the way to admissibility. But when you now admit, the tribunal at the end of the day must view the video evidence. And possibly the adverse party must have the opportunity of viewing the video evidence and to ask pertinent person. That whoever comes in to tender it must be ready to be cross-examined as to the accuracy, authenticity, and otherwise of the video evidence.
As an expert, how do you perhaps differentiate from, or how do you certify a real video from one that's been manipulated?
Well, that looks more like a photoshopping or something, in terms of where you have manipulation of electronic devices. I've taken photographs before that I asked myself, is it my same person? A lot of manipulation. So one would expect that when you're taking video evidence, you bring in your IT experts to view it for you and tell you areas of manipulation. These are the areas you suggest to the proponent of the evidence under cross-examination. Now, look at this, look at this. The whole idea is to destroy that evidence and weaken its value. But in terms of live streaming of events, that something is going on somewhere and you are there reporting it live, and from there it's going straight to your studio without opportunity of any editorial work. I think it is almost impossible to manipulate such ones. So you must categorize them. Photos are easy to manipulate. Pre-recorded events are easy to manipulate, but live streaming events are not likely to, at least they have not gotten to that level yet where they can manipulate events that have been streamed live.
And here's a recap of the panel of inquiry instituted for victims of police brutality in some states across the country.
At the Cross River State Panel of Inquiry on Police Brutality and Other Related Offences, the former Chief Judge of the State High Court, Justice Michael Edem, called on all witnesses and victims to present clear evidences devoid of falsehood in order to have a true reflection of various incidences that occurred over the years. In Osun State, the Judicial Panel of Inquiry commenced sitting after receiving 5 petitions since its inauguration 14 days ago. The panel, headed by Justice Akinwale Oladimeji, a retired Chief Judge of the State High Court, said petitioners must present convincing facts and evidence before the panel before adequate compensation can be rewarded. Earlier, the Judiciary Panel Chairman, Justice Oladimeji, inaugurated 3 members of the panel who were absent during the former swearing-in by the governor. The panel will be sitting on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Saturdays. Over in Lagos, while the absence of the youth representative stalled proceedings, the Lagos State government has been dragged before a federal high court to disband the Judicial Panel of Inquiry and Restitution for victims of SARS-related abuses in Lagos State and the Lekki Tollgate incident. The plaintiffs in the case, Adekunle Augustine and Simeon Akogu, prayed the court to disband the panel on the ground that the Lagos State governor, being a party in the matter, did not exercise his power in public interest by setting up the panel. In Nasarawa State, north-central Nigeria, the Judicial Commission of Inquiry into the activities of the disbanded SARS began public sitting on Tuesday after receiving 16 petitions. Chairman of the panel, Justice Badamasi Maina, reveals their commitment to ensure justice for all while soliciting the cooperation of counsels to beat the 6-month time frame given. The 8 members of the committee include litigants, counsels, and civil society organizations. The Taraba State Judicial Panel of Inquiry and Restitution for Victims of Police Brutality and other security agencies have assured victims of adequate security protection, devoid of intimidation before, during, and after testifying before the panel. At the maiden sitting in Jalingo, the chairman of the panel, retired Justice Christopher Awubra, promises to be fair to all parties adding that so far the panel has received 11 petitions. The Judicial Panel of Inquiry on Police Brutality was inaugurated on the 22nd of October 2020 by Governor Darius Ishaku.
That's our program for now. Until next time, don't forget that you can catch this episode of the program and past episodes on our YouTube channel. I'm Millicent Walker. Thank you for watching. Stay safe.